Hi there. I wanted to welcome everyone to our panel today. We're going to talk about the importance of inclusion and the recognition of intersectionality when developing innovative products and services of the future. Just quickly to say, my name's Helen Jobe. I'm an insight and futures consultant. I've been working probably for the last 20 years or so with some of the biggest organizations in the world on their future strategies, making sure that they are ready for what the future might bring. And I think we can't really talk about the future without talking about inclusivity as being such a huge part of any sustainable strategy going forward. I'm going to get to introducing my incredible panel in a second, but I just wanted to remind you why we're here. We're here because we're part of the I Am Remarkable Week, which is an initiative started by Google, and it's all about empowering everybody, especially women and people from underrepresented groups. So this whole week, if you've been tuning in and if you continue to tune in, it's going to emphasize the power of workplace diversity, the importance of allyship, real allyship, not optical allyship, and also encourage everyone to celebrate their achievements, whether it's in the workplace or beyond that. So far, I'm going to get my numbers right. The week has reached around 150,000 participants, which is incredible, across 140 different countries and 800 companies. So wherever you're tuning in from, we're really excited to have you. And hopefully this will be quite a fun and interesting hour or so of chat. So we're going to talk about inclusion and diversity, of course, but we're going to talk about it in a few different ways. We're going to talk about why it's so important in terms of driving societal change, positive societal change, but also we all understand we are part of a commercial world. So why is it important actually in achieving commercial success? How is it actually affecting the workplaces that we're all part of? I know many of us are in working from home right now, but how is it going to affect the workforce today, but also the workforce of tomorrow? And we need to also talk about the lockdown and what, if anything, what lessons or messages we've learned from being part of the last 8 or 9 months of this sort of universal vulnerability. But before we sort of get any further, I want to turn to each member of the panel. I want them to give you a sort of a quick introduction to who they are, a little bit of their bio, but also explain what their relevance or expertise is regards to today's discussion. So we're going to start with Anna.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Helen, for a wonderful opening. Looking forward to today's discussion. My name is Anna Baird, and I am the head of culture and innovation at Google in our customer success business in Google Cloud. And it is a pleasure to be able to join my fellow panelists, whom you'll hear from in a minute, regarding today's discussion, what Helen spoke about when it comes to the I Am Remarkable program. I cannot emphasize enough how amazing it is to be a part of an energy and a group of people who want to get together and raise one another up and support one another in how we go to work, how we show up every day and get a chance to bring our whole selves to work. I think in terms of my expertise, I have been involved in a number of speaking initiatives and panels when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I know we'll share a little bit more later about what that means to each of us as panelists. But I am also for Google in an arena where I encourage our customers and users to be data-driven. And it is no better place to have a discussion about having diversity of thought at the table, looking at multiple user experiences and understanding that we need to have a number of perspectives to create the right products and services. So I look forward to sharing a bit of that expertise today. And again, thank you to Helen and the team for organizing an incredible I Am Remarkable Week. I just can't say enough about this program. Thanks so much, Helen.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Anna. And so then I'll invite Ariel to join us on the stage, on the screen.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Helen. My name is Ariel Lee. I am a junior service and interaction designer with Accenture's Federal Studios, and I am also the co-founder of an initiative called Remain that is helping men and women with curly and textured hair really love their hair and reframe the conversation that we're having around the stigma that can come with textured hair in the workplace and truly encourage them on their journeys.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ariel. And then Karen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this panel. Thanks, Helen. My name is Karen. I work for Accenture in the UK. I am on this panel because I built Accenture's Global Responsible AI practice, which means we look at how we build technologies from a governance and ethical perspective. And throughout the time, I have grown a team globally across US, Asia, and Europe. And my team is made up of people from a very diverse set of background, both from their nationality, gender, as well as, of course, their technical backgrounds and kind of what they've studied. A big passion and kind of something that's core to who I am is to mentor, educate, and develop other people. And so the topic of today's panel is really core to building the pipeline of future talent in AI and developing others. And of course, being a person of color and female, it's an area that is very, very close to my heart. And it's an area that through the responsible build of technology and my passion for developing future talent, something I'm very excited to be here discussing.
Amazing. Thanks, Karen. So finally, last but not least, obviously, we'll go to Ez.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'm Ez, or as H. Britton. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Code Untapped, the Digital Skills Accelerator. Our focus is on innovation through diversity. We identify, upskill, and place extremely talented, diverse technologists in organizations. On top of that, I'm also founding member, principal, and CTO in residence for ImpactX Capital, which is an organization it's a venture capital fund dedicated towards supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs across the UK and Europe. So why am I here today? Because diversity, equity, inclusion is literally what I do every day of the week. So I'm really pleased to be here today.
Amazing. So I was fortunate enough to have an hour talking to each member of this panel, and all of them have got so much to say that we're going to try and make sure we hear as much as we possibly can in this short space of time. So I'm going to dive into the questions, and I suppose start with what seems like a quite simple question. I'm going to ask you, Karen, if we were talking about inclusion, what does the word inclusion actually mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, the notion of inclusion is understanding that systemically there has been inequalities across multiple dimensions. So, not everyone who is, of a particular gender or identify as particular orientation or is of particular skin color or race have been treated the same, throughout the history of time. And then, of course, the other thing is also different kind of social classes have also been treated differently. So I think inclusion is the ability to understand that, different people will have different levels of privilege. And sometimes if you come from a background where you are an intersection of two or more of those categories I've listed above, it may be the case that you may have been left out in multiple areas throughout your life. And of course, that could then become systemic and perpetuated if that's been passed down from generation to generation. So in summary, inclusion for me means the ability to know that that has occurred, to not sort of ignore that it's, part of, human history, and to really, when we're designing future products and services, realize that that's something we need to think about and invite people who have traditionally been excluded to the table and to be part of designing future services and products.
Amazing. Ez, when we were chatting before, we talked about the fact that sometimes people interchange the words diversity and inclusion, but you were actually quite clear that they're quite different things.
Yeah, so to myself, I view diversity really as being, it's a metric, it's a statistic. It tells you what is the makeup of your organization, what is the demographic, and how does that look like in comparison to the society that you live within. Whereas inclusion is about a sense of being, sense of belonging. It's do I feel like I belong in this environment? Once you start to foster that sense of inclusion and people both feel they believe that they belong there, but also that they can progress there. And this is the thing that a lot of people forget about. It's not enough just to have you in the business. You've also got to be able to progress through and up into the business as well. But once you have that, what then starts to happen is diversity grows organically from that, because what happens is you start to get more people, you have a more diverse organization, which is reflected in statistics and how that organization is comprised demographically.
It's really interesting. Ariel, from your point of view, you talked about the idea of inclusion being about a safe space or feeling safe. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, I think that inclusion is, we always talk about that quote of diversity is everyone being able to sit at the table and inclusion is everyone being able to eat at the table. I think another part of diversity and inclusion truly is providing that psychological safety for people to show up as their true and authentic selves, because without that psychological safety provided in a company, it can become difficult for people to truly come to the table with their full self, because they're still trying to protect that little bit of themselves just to be there and have that voice.
Anna, we talked about this idea of psychological safety as well. I mean, how do we achieve it, or do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought Ariel did a good job there of describing that, bringing yourself to work and just feeling that sense of being where you want to trust the people around you, your colleagues, your advisors, your managers. Psychological safety to so many of us is the trust and openness. When I share my opinion and people take in that data, is it considered? Is it a part of the actual solution set? I think, from a perspective of culture and innovation at Google, we talk about psychological safety as our everything when it comes to all of our other cultural norms, like empowerment and environment. And so I think, coming back to your original question about inclusion, when you sit down, stand up, virtually get into a meeting, and you feel like you're joining and people have that ability to listen and to hear you. We have a saying at Google, disagree and commit. And so it's not saying that we all have to be on the same page, that we all have to go away in agreement, but disagreeing and committing is about the fact that we do trust one another, and eventually we take a decision and we all get behind it. And so it's about having those opinions shared and finding what that decision is, and then all of us collectively trusting one another to move forward. So that's what it is to me.
Excellent. So obviously in this particular panel, we could talk about inclusion generally for a long time, but in this particular panel, we're focused on the creation of new products, right? New products and services, and making things that are fit for, well, let's ignore 2020, making things that are fit for a good future, 2021, 22 onwards. Karen, can you talk a little bit about why you think it's so important? And also that for you, inclusion is not really just about gender and race, is it?
Yeah. So I guess to answer that question, like why is it important in the creation of new products and services, we should take a step back and kind of zoom out a bit and think about, why we create products and services, why we advance technology. In my view, I think that the creation of products and services and advancement of technology and kind of the building of things like AI, which is an area that I focus quite a lot on, is that we want to do that to raise the bar for humanity, right? Like we want to make lives better. We want to make, things more convenient. We don't want to have to hand wash our clothes anymore, or like hand wash like dishes anymore. It's about kind of like that bar raising and like better quality of life. So if we think about that as kind of like the base layer foundation, then we need to realize that society, communities are made up of very different and diverse sets of people. So, we have different races, different genders, different sexuality. We have people with special needs. We have people with, very different viewpoints. And then, of course, we also have to acknowledge the fact that while a lot of these technologies, especially kind of in the context of this panel today, products and services are in a technological world, and it is, you require technological skill sets to build these new tools and new products and services. We also need to have people who are non-technical in that conversation. So we need diversity not only in race, gender, sexuality. Those things are immensely and incredibly important, but we also need to acknowledge that non-technical talent is really important in the design of these products and services. because these non-technical talents, so people who are designers, people who are potentially, like business strategists, social scientists, will be bringing ideas and perspectives that maybe a technical person may not have. And I think that's quite crucial to ensuring these products and services are built in a very human-centric way, which comes back to the original point, the people that we're building them for.
Yeah, no, exactly. Anna, did you have anything you wanted to add on this idea of why you think it's so important?
I think Karen said it. At Google, we focus on start with the user and all else will follow. And that keeps us accountable to people. It keeps us upholding the high standards and scientific excellence that Karen and her team are building out for everyone to follow. These are principles of design. And so from my perspective, in order to be data-driven, we have to think about those users, and there is no one user archetype buyer out there. And if there was, the whole world would be the same person. And so I think, all of us here, we probably all look at products and services very differently. The way I would decide to purchase something, the way I would decide to work with a particular platform is going to be different from Ez or Ariel or Karen or yourself, Helen. So acknowledging that and understanding that we have to build that into how we go to market, and not just how we market it. This is not about a catchphrase or verbiage used to describe the product or service. It's what it actually does, how it attracts or detracts from how we live our lives. And so to me, the core of that is we have to build and test products and services to be sure that there is a safety from bias. And so the best way to do that, as Karen described, is to have a number of people, a number of perspectives building, and then a number of testers, so that we can really poke holes in places that we've turned a blind eye or have not thought through what this means to different individuals across the world. And we've seen that in COVID, and we know that not everyone is the same or in the same circumstances.
Amazing. I mean, Ez, you've got an incredible resume for our American audiences, or CV here in the UK. Can you tell me a little bit about what you think about this? We talked about innovation relevancy, we talked about the idea of access to talent, etc. Oh, you're on mute, Ez.
It's my fault. So when I think about this, I think about four key things that then lead on to something else. And one is, as we've been talking about, is innovation, right? Everyone says they want innovative products. They want people who can think outside the box, but they invariably hire a team of people who've all lived inside the box, and it's usually the same box on the same street, same house, right? If you want that innovation, you have to have people with different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, different ways of living to bring different perspectives to a problem. That then leads to relevancy. You can be as innovative as you want, but if that product isn't relative to the lives of those people, then it's pointless. Okay, so we talk in the fintech space, for example. I spent over 15 years in that space. We talk about financial exclusion, financial inclusion. But a lot of the people building the products to try and prevent financial exclusion have never been financially excluded, never experienced it. So how can they create the right products for these people? And then we talk about access to talent. Well, everyone wants the best people, right? That's what they always talk about when they're hiring. That's why it's so difficult. And yet, instead of expanding our pool, we narrow it to people who look and mirror ourselves. When I say that, I don't mean what you look like in the mirror. I mean our backgrounds and our CVs, which tend to reflect what we do look like in the mirror and go directly counter to that first point around innovation. And then finally, it's about retention of talent. Right? There's no point in hiring all these incredible people if they don't feel like they belong. They're not made to feel included in the business because they then leave. So that becomes some very real reasons. But if we look at the impact some of this has, right, we can look at 10, 20 years ago, hair dryers, for example, hand dryers in a men's bathroom. If you're of a darker skin complexion like myself, you might find yourself putting your hand under the dryer and nothing happening. Right? You might find that you weren't able to dry your hands properly. You see it with soap sanitizers, which suddenly becomes a real problem during a COVID-19 pandemic when everyone needs to wash their hands. And yet, why doesn't it work for us? Because laser light reflects off the skin. If your skin is of a different color, you get a different level of wavelength absorption. the reflection doesn't happen. The sensor can't detect that your hands are there. Why is that? Because we haven't tested for a data set that includes people like me, like Ariel, like Karen, for example. Now that seems like a very silly example, but then let's have a look at AI and self-driving cars. When you have the exact same problem and these self-driving cars aren't able to detect if a dark-skinned person is a person or not, you have a very real application of a lack of inclusion in product development having a real life impact.
Wow. You made an incredible segue there to COVID, but actually I want to give Anna a chance if there was anything you wanted to say around the AI conversation, Anna, while we're on it, before we move slightly to the pandemic.
I mean, as those examples, I think, say it all, which is we just did not think through in the creation of that intelligence. We didn't think through who this would affect. And you talk about COVID. I mean, the understanding that hand sanitizers, which are everywhere, as we know, you cannot go anywhere without using those. You can't buy groceries. You can't pay bills. You can't do anything without that. The fact that that would be a barrier for people is not acceptable. It's unbelievably challenging to think of that we live in a world like that still in 2020, in my opinion. And so I think coming back to what Karen was sharing, how do we challenge each other to bring multiple testers, multiple perspectives, so that we do not have these challenges that are insurmountable for groups of people: accessibility, gender, religion, general experience and background. That should never be a barrier to adoption for users. And that to me is where we come back to user centricity and really actually doing something about it versus speaking to it. So as great examples.
Amazing. Well, while we're talking about the C word, do we think there's been any effect? Ariel, I'm going to talk to you now. In terms of, the promotion of inclusion or the recognition of intersectionality, do you think that COVID has had any sort of positive benefits on that?
I think COVID has truly caused us to slow down and become more human and just recognize each other's humanity, because it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If our basic needs are not met, if we're not fed, housed, clothed, how are we going to show up to work as our authentic self? I think right now in this pandemic, especially in the beginning with people having to transition to working from home, a lot of times with kids and children having to go to school online, there are so many environmental inequities. There are so many economical inequities that have been really highlighted because of this pandemic. Children who may not have access to Wi-Fi, that now becomes a barrier for them to receive an education, and for that next generation of humans who will be innovating and providing those technologies that will really, spur us forward. They're not being able to get the materials and that they need. So I think COVID has caused us to have to become more human as a society, because inclusive design is human-centered design. So really just thinking beyond, how can I make this beautiful experience that has all of these bells and whistles and is so impressive, to how can I make sure that this experience is able to meet everyone where they're at and make sure that everyone is able to partake in it. So I think COVID has truly just allowed us to see those inequities a bit more, and just also design better for them as companies and design better for them as teams as we expand our own awarenesses.
Amazing. Karen, we had a conversation. Obviously, Black Lives Matter is not new news, but this idea that somehow during the pandemic, people have suddenly become aware of things that they weren't aware of before, and that they're spending time and observing. And you think that the sort of combination of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement has had some interesting impacts?
Yeah, I think that 2020 has been a very interesting year, obviously. And in so many regards, for so many different people having different experience during national lockdown, during this pandemic. But I think that the point you raised around the pandemic x BLM is a very interesting one around shining light on systemic inequalities, which is something I spoke about a bit earlier. So, the notion of inclusion and diversity is present and exists because of systemic inequalities, and because, that some of that is perpetuated. And I think that a lot of companies during this pandemic are looking and thinking, what can we do? And I think it's like really shine light on the notion of like racism, which is, by the way, not new, and inequalities, which is, again, not a new thing. And it's just kind of like this pandemic and BLM has just been like kind of a amplification of the situation that's present in some people's lives on a daily basis. And so an example for that, I guess I have two. So the first one is over the summer I worked on a project where we were helping an organization which was trying to connect businesses with like local communities because like respond to COVID. And one of the things that we saw was that like my team did some statistics around like kind of the macroeconomic effects of the pandemic. And unsurprisingly, one of the things we saw was that the pandemic was hitting BAME and people who have in the notion of inclusion and diversity been left out the most, like even harder. So it's like those people who are in a normal like good economy day left out are like kind of even like worse off in the pandemic. And then the second one, I think that's something that was raised a bit earlier. So like if we think about kind of inequality, and if we think about companies thinking about building products and services, sometimes some of the inequalities means that even kind of basic things such as like having access to hardware before you even think about like fancy UX or UI or like some AI is like not even something that's accessible for some of these people. So it's kind of realizing that sometimes inclusion means like really just going back to basics and realizing like the privilege that we have, and some people live lives that we can't even imagine because it's just like so far removed from what we get to have.
Yeah, no, I totally. And as we were talking about this, there's been a lot of noise, right? There's been a lot of noise, a lot of corporations, coming out saying they want to respond. But actually, have you seen much real change or much real action being taken?
Well, we certainly saw a lot of black squares on Instagram and Twitter, which was great, right? But it doesn't take much to put a black square up on Twitter or Instagram. I think one of the key things that we've seen has been fantastic has been the question of why seems to be going away, right? We would always say there is a problem and it needs to be fixed. And the answer you keep getting is, are you sure? Are you sure there's a problem? And that seems to finally be going away. And what's been fantastic is that there's actually been a lot of data finally starting to come out. In fact, there was a report by Extend VC, which is run by Erica Brodnock, around the genuine state of venture capital and investing in people from different backgrounds. And, we often hear less than 4%, less than 1% has gone to black founders, for example. And it tends to get lumped under the term BAME as well, which ignores the fact that Black, Asian, and various different ethnic minorities have vastly different experiences, particularly depending what industries they go into. However, when we saw the numbers, they were even worse than we thought. I think in terms of Black entrepreneurs, it's 0.24% of venture capital has gone to Black male entrepreneurs. Black female entrepreneurs fared even worse, 0.02% of funding. That is an astonishingly small amount, right? And the reason why I bring this up is that what I'm pleased about is that finally this information is coming to the forefront. We all work in technology here, right? Where's the first place you start when you have a problem? The data. You look at the numbers. First thing as a programmer you're taught to do, don't try and solve the problem, put a profiler on it, understand where the issue is, right? We've been refusing to do this in general because no one wanted to actually see the numbers, no one wanted to see the data. That seems to be changing, which is fantastic. What we're still not really seeing is actual action, right? We hear a lot of noise about, yes, we will support founders, yes, we will invest in funds, yes, we will do this. However, I need to see this, I need to see that, I need to see that, and I need to see that. And you ignore the fact that those pillars aren't there yet. So we need to allow certain organizations or certain individuals to hop, skip over some of these so that we can get these things into place. Hopefully we'll see a bit more action next year.
Wow, I mean, it's incredible, Ariel, that you've managed to get anywhere with so many barriers set up against you as a female Black entrepreneur.
As a female founder, it definitely is a unique challenge. Whenever I step on the stage, and to top that off, my company is a beauty tech company that uses machine learning. So it looks at like hair data to then connect users to products. So that's like, even like, what are you doing? Because people aren't, the data sets don't exist and we're just creating them. So it's like when I step on a stage, not only do I have to convince you of the viability of the problem that I'm solving for and that my business can work, but I also have to teach you and hold your hand to understand the pain that I'm solving for and why it's important and why it's not just something that that you could solve by some YouTube videos and going to the store. I think that truly creating more diverse programs at the core when students are in school, and providing even primary school, elementary school, and providing opportunities for young men and women of color to see diverse entrepreneurs that look like themselves, to know that they had the opportunity, because there are so many children in these communities that are entrepreneurial, that are entrepreneurs, that have businesses and side hustles, but don't see themselves as that because they don't see themselves on that stage. They don't see themselves represented within who these tech giants are supposed to be. They're like, I'm not a Mark Zuckerberg. And just being like, you can do this, you have this opportunity, and providing them with programs and companies, providing opportunities for people to innovate even within their companies and see themselves in that light, pushing those programs to allow their employees to develop themselves, provides for that innovation that will allow them to build tech, build programs and services that will truly change the world.
Amazing. Well, Anna, as you work at a tech giant, I'm going to turn to you for a second. We can see from a moral, ethical, societal point of view why inclusion is the right thing to do. If we're looking at bottom line and we're talking commercially, how do we convince, the organizations we're working in that it is going to actually bring more commercial success?
I mean, it's an easy question for me because Sundar speaks about it all the time. And so I'm not going to even try and paraphrase all of the statements he's made about how we've built the community at Google. And let me lead with, no company is perfect. And to Ez's point, this is it's a crawl, walk, run, and we're barely crawling as a world right now, I think, in this space. So when I come back to understanding how Google works and the foundation of our culture, the whole concept of hiring and retaining talent so that we are not a microcosm of one type of individual is our constant challenge. And yet one of the things I think we're most proud of. And when Sundar talks about ways that we've provided both financial funding or support for communities like our employee resource groups, which are referred to as our ERGs, which are for all of the different individuals represented in Google's community. I was hearing some of the examples about what we've learned in COVID, and one that continues to just baffle me is the fact that as we went virtual, our entire team was communicating over email using a particular font and a particular size. And what we've learned through data-driven analysis in COVID is actually there is a font and a size that is accessible to everyone for people that are more visually impaired or have particular reading challenges. These are small details that we can all be better at understanding. And so when you take a very minute detail like that and you change the font so that everyone globally in a company can be included in reading a newsletter, That allows everyone to come to the table and have the same amount of information. What they then can do with that information, like running a Black Lives Matter conversation or bringing a panel to the table or creating a product or service for our consumer, you need to start with everyone getting that information first. And so coming back to the whole premise of Google is, providing the world useful information. That's why we were built as a company. And Larry and Sergey made that clear. And it was not about providing particular groups of the world, corners of the world, certain communities. It was about providing easy, accessible, and quality information for everyone. And so to me, when I reflect on what I get to do with startups as a part of Google's environment, my whole hope and my whole premise for work is to be able to step outside the norms and push us to think differently. And I think that Ez said it best, which is the only way to do that is to continue to push for the right and total perspective of data. And so we might not have it right now. We might have holes in our data, and we need to acknowledge that and go out and get more data sources. And I think that's coming back to what Google tries to do. Let's paint the full picture. Let's poke holes in what we have and make sure we are bringing all of that data to the table and getting the right perspectives into that data set.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna. It's really great to hear from sort of Google's perspectives. And if we agree, I mean, we all agree, the five of us, that inclusion is super important in designing products for the future. I guess the question that many people may still have is like, how do we actually practically do that? How do we practically achieve this? Karen, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I have many thoughts on this. I mean, this is pretty much like the kind of crux of this practice that I've been working in and building and expanding over the last sort of 2.5, nearly 3 years. So for us, what we tend to do is like we kind of try to break it down into very practical steps that one can take. And all of us have talked about this earlier. Core to that is the talent and the diversity of the talent you have in the organization. So when we think about a problem, we first think like, okay, if you want to translate a problem into a technological solution, and in my case, an algorithm or an AI-driven solution, we want to map out the people who will be impacted by the design of this technology. So who are the stakeholders, who are potential customers, and who are people that fall into buckets of maybe impacted for some reason, whether they are the direct customer or for some other kind of like second, third order consequences. And we want to get an understanding of like, what does it mean to be them, and what does it mean to live their lives in relation to how this technology or solution might impact, how they go about doing things. And so a huge part of that is coming back to a lot of what we've already discussed, not assuming the position of knowing how their lives are like or how their lived experience is, and really ensuring that, if we as a team don't have someone who has that experience, then we go out there and try and find out, and that's part of the design thinking process, right? Like, it's like, who are the personas? Can we get an understanding? Can we interview them? Can we validate like, our hypothesis about how their lived experience is to be true, or can we iterate upon what we think it is? Or maybe we need to, redesign it because they told us everything we thought was true is completely false. So that's like very core to kind of the beginning. And then as we go through the process, we want to make sure that we're constantly going back and validating it. And then a huge part of kind of once something like this is sort of like released out into the wild as a live product, we want to make sure that there's sort of a governance system that's in place. So if things need to be changed about it, or if it needs to be updated internal to the company that's building this product, there needs to be sort of something, either like a board or a group of people that are governing the system. And then thinking through, if we need to make changes or if we need to add something to it, like what is acceptable and what isn't, and what are the kind of perspectives we need to bring in to make sure that we are not just making assumptions about how this product may or may not work. Because like, sure, like, I might be at the intersection of, a person of color and female, but I won't have the lived experience of many other people. And, there will be so many other areas of inclusivity that even in this panel, we haven't even been able to touch on, such as, disabilities and special needs, none of which I know much or anything about. So there's so many kind of nuances and complexities that, to Anna's point, we're still just crawling and have so much more to do to kind of get to a point where inclusivity is really core to everything.
No, it's a really good point. And we're obviously talking from, all of us are talking from our own lived experience today. And, you know, if we, you know, it's great and we talk to our audiences and we include as many different mindsets as we possibly can, but on the day-to-day in an actual workforce, Ariel, how do we make a workforce feel that they can bring their authentic self to the office, provided we ever return to an office environment or online? But how can we actually achieve it so that, you know, I feel safe and secure going to work every day? Ariel, you're on mute.
Sorry. I think one of the best things that we can do is create a workforce and world that really looks like the communities that you're serving. I think it means providing opportunities for us to connect beyond just the happy hour, because many people have children, or some people cannot drink and cannot, or just choose to not partake in alcohol. So just providing, you know, spaces for us to connect. I think one of the greatest things I experienced when I was first an intern with Accenture's Federal Studios with Fjord was every month we would have opportunities to connect and talk about our lived experiences as diverse people, whether that be our religious backgrounds, whether that be our ethnicities, like where we're coming from, and just sitting there and listening to each other as humans and empathizing, because especially as designers and people who are creating data-driven experiences, how are you to then be empathetic if you are not empathetic and opening yourself up and loving those around you? So I thought that was an amazing and beautiful practice that the studio had to make sure that we all felt included, seen, and heard in the space, and felt prepared to then see, hear, and be present for the people that we were designing technologies for. I think not even in that like way, there are so many ways that companies can provide opportunities for individuals to feel included in their own space, whether that be hosting opportunities for these people to show up and better themselves, like by lunchtime talks, or just having outside work opportunities and sponsoring them to go to other talks and opportunities for them to then feel that inclusion. I think that those are small ways that we all can feel a little bit more included in our communities as we head back to work.
Amazing. I was going to go to my last question, but actually we've got some great questions coming in from the audience, so I want to make sure we've got time for them. So the first one is, hi, I have noticed that DEI efforts are more common in large enterprises. How can startups begin with a DEI culture? In my experience, if you've got few resources as a startup, it's a much harder challenge. Maybe, Ez, is this something you might be able to speak to?
Yeah, I'm actually really pleased you came to me with this one, because the question you would have asked me, I think, applies directly to this anyway. And it's a great question. And, you know, we talk about so many different areas, whether it's, you know, internships, paid internships, ideally, whether it's sponsoring, whether it's bringing in blind CV processes and all this kind of stuff. Which typically it tends to be the large corporates that have the capacity for. But to be honest, it starts at the same place, whether it's a small startup or whether it's a large corporate. And that is understanding the community, right? The biggest blocker to diversity in any organization are the gatekeepers in those organizations, who either take you through the recruitment process or take you up through the ladder, right? They're the bigger problem. And the way to fix that is they need to have direct interaction and access and exposure to people from these diverse communities. So the place you start is always community outreach. And it's not just about hosting a talk. Talks are fantastic, right? They are fantastic. They're great. They allow you to get other people's opinions in, right? But you need to be out in part of the community. And there are so many organizations in the space, whether you're working with a company like mine, Code Untapped, and you run an innovation lab with us, whether you go to Coding Black Females and you support their efforts in teaching Black girls to code, whether it's working with Color in Tech and support them from either mentoring or supporting them in actually funding the development of Black technologists, whether it's Code First Girls, who are color agnostic, but it's all about getting women into technology, and you either mentor them or you support them in developing their coding courses. But all of these activities give people within your organization direct exposure to people they don't normally get to see, get to feel, get to experience, get to hear, right? Because the biggest issue is once you come across someone who has a very different way of communicating, because that is their cultural norm, you come slamming up against a brick wall, because that feels very uncomfortable, right? So we need to get people comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? For me, for example, this is one of the first times I've ever been on a panel where I'm the only guy, right? Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Which is incredible, but it's also sad that it's taken this long for that to be the case, right? So this is where you start, and I don't care how big your organization is, every company can do that. And as a small company, please do one thing. If you're an executive in any business, find someone from an underrepresented background, an entrepreneur, mentor that person, but don't just mentor them, allow them to sit in on your senior leadership and board level meetings. Give them direct exposure to your business and give your board exposure to these individuals as well. And then we might start to see some real differences.
Amazing. I knew you'd have the great answers. Thank you. We've had another question come in that says, many of the examples we've given today have been about the importance of diversity, focusing on the design and user testing of products. However, within tech companies, the roles that have the least diversity are the technical roles, such as software engineering. Maybe Karen, you can talk to this. How important is it for product development to have diversity in those technical fields?
Yeah, I'm really glad you came to me with that question as well, because I was thinking about all the thoughts I had about it in the back of my head. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the kind of areas of passion for me is people development, mentoring, and kind of just being an educator at heart. And throughout kind of my time at Accenture and also in kind of my communities outside, whether that's someone reaching out to me, through LinkedIn, or new joiners to the company, or friends, or just kind of any sort of network where people are reaching out to kind of seek advice on entering tech as a woman, etc. I am constantly, saying to them two things. So to answer the question first, diversity in technical roles such as software engineering is not something we're going to be able to solve overnight. As has mentioned, there are all these organizations that realize that software engineering and a lot of these technical fields aren't diverse and are very kind of like white male heavy fundamentally. And I think that that's something that needs to have people plugging in at sort of all levels. So, relooking at education at a K-12 level, relooking at what it means to be inclusive for people who are picking their end of high school subjects, which leads them to qualifying for various degrees, whether that's STEM or not at university, people applying for jobs, etc., having role models. I think those are all things that are happening, and we need to be continuously putting effort to those and really trying to make inclusion and diversity like a true core element and leveling the playing field there. But while that's sort of happening and the tide's turning, what can we do in the meantime? I think there are, to my point earlier, there are two things. So one is for the talent that do exist that are outside of kind of the bucket that is dominant in that area, how do we encourage them to be you actually belong here as well? And you might feel like you are not good enough, or you don't have role models, or it'll be difficult because you're the outsider in this. You are someone who should really apply for these jobs and really just encourage them and be this is an area that you could really make a difference in. And then that sort of ties to my next point, which is that in technical fields, of course, it's very important to have diversity in those fields. It's important to have diversity in all fields. But in my mind, diversity doesn't just mean that software engineers are, a variety of different kind of backgrounds. That's of course important. But if we can't achieve that today, what else can we do? So one area that I am very passionate about building is the future pipeline of AI talent that aren't just technical people. So it's thinking about, strategists, operational people, governance, policy folks, people who are working with these technical people in AI labs, in the government, in a private sector company, in a think tank, who are also there day to day working alongside a technical person. And as a collective team, putting hats together, thinking through what the solution to the problem could be. And so I think those are the two things that are really important to ensuring that there's diversity in those fields. So those are my thoughts.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. I think we've got time for one more question, which Ariel, I'm going to direct to you, which says, having launched your innovative product services, incorporating inclusion and diversity at the core, is there anything that stands out that you've learned? Do you have any key tips for people that you would pass on to if they were thinking of launching something themselves?
Oh, yes, I do. I think just summed up, my 3 main points would be, you should always rethink the approach that you have. Research is everything. You should build a diverse team from the start, and innovation is bred from adversity. So you need to understand the workarounds that people have and what they're doing. And I'll start there. I think in creating my product, which is trying to help people rethink how they're doing their hair and what their natural hair care journey looks like, and really trying to break down the adversity that people have, I had to really understand what the true pain was around caring for natural hair. So that meant talking to more than 200 diverse men and women across the United States. An operative word also on men, understanding men's journey too with hair care, because within our communities, I found that they felt largely left out in the personal care space and their journeys weren't receiving enough attention. And even me as a Black female, I didn't truly understand perhaps how they were seeing their hair. So having those conversations and also looking at the workarounds that many men were using around learning about their hair, caring for their hair, and even understanding their hair was super integral in creating my service. Building a diverse team from the start. So not only looking for women for my team or necessarily Black women with hair that looks like mine, but women from a broad spectrum and men from a broad spectrum of experiences when building my team from the jump was super important in building an innovative product and disrupting a space. Because how are you going to disrupt a space if the team that you have, if the ideas and the voices at your table does not reflect the world or the market that you're trying to disrupt? So really starting there. And then lastly, just rethinking the approach that you have, rethinking how it is that you're solving the problem or you're approaching what you're looking to do. I think a lot of times we get stuck trying to think about things the way we had. And I think Henry Ford said, if he had asked people what they'd wanted before they had the Model T car, they would have just said they wanted a faster horse. One great thing about user research is that we can understand the perspective and the challenges that people have. But if we're not rethinking the approach beyond just the pain that they'll have, we might not end up with a Tesla or a Model T, but we'll end up with a faster horse.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think we've got 5 minutes left, and I think we've scratched the surface of what is a huge issue with so many nuances and elements to it that people need to understand. But as a panel, you've been incredible, and I could listen to you all day. So in the spirit of inclusion, I would just open it up and say, if any of you have any last points you want to make or something you're dying to pass on that you haven't had a chance in one of the questions, then please do so now.
I just have one thing to add. So on the kind of point around like diversity within technical fields, I think that one of the stigma for people who are non-technical is that, am I good enough to enter a technical field because I don't have a technical background? I'm not mathematical. And I think that that's something that I know has held a lot of people back, myself included. But I now know and can, confidently say, as a non-technical person, I know that my voice is relevant in this space because I bring such a multitude of diverse thinking that is non-technically grounded thinking from, the social science field, from the legal field. And so I think to those people out there who are wondering about inclusion and diversity in tech and are saying, well, yeah, I'm diverse from, race, gender, sexuality perspective, but could I also play a part in building tech of the future as a non-technical person? My answer to that is, yeah, hell yes. You and all of us, we have different experiences to bring to it. And definitely, I think empathizing with them and then them learning from you is something great.
Amazing. Thanks, Karen. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd happily say something. I just want to say this is really important. Increasing diversity and inclusion, especially in technology, and you hear this quite a lot, is not about filling a quota. It's not about ticking a box, and it's definitely not about lowering the bar, right? By increasing diversity and inclusion, you're actually increasing the level of competition. You're opening the talent pool, and you're seeing greater level of ability coming into your organization. Actually, you're raising the bar by allowing more people to participate. So you're getting better products and better outcomes for everybody. And it's good for society.
Well, I think that is the best conclusion I could give. So thank you for that. Thank you for doing my job. And I think I just want to say thank you to Google and Accenture for having us as part of I Am Remarkable Week. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope everybody watching, wherever you are, has enjoyed the last hour or so. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Helen.